Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Excel 10 Minute Leaders Live. My name is Graham Brown here in Singapore, all the way out to the other side of the world today. Joining us in the studio, Naz, the mind designer. Naz, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm on the opposite end in Brazil.
Brazil. Which part of
hmm
Brazil are you in?
I'm in a little island called Florianopolis in the south.
Nice. Are you from there?
Originally, yes, I haven't been here for a while, and well, just turned out that I ended up here for the pandemic. So it's pretty good,
Wow.
actually.
Well, if you're going to be stranded anywhere in the world, it's not a bad place to be living right now, is it? On
No,
an
it was,
island.
I couldn't complain. It was very nice, actually.
Okay, then Naz, the mind designer. We're going to find out about mind design in the next 10 minutes. Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Let's do this then. All right. First question, the formal entry level question. What does it say on your business card, Naz?
Inclusive culture designer.
Hmm.
That's pretty much what my mission is.
What does that
So.
mean?
Well, I think that we're ready for a change in how businesses are run and how people build their corporate leadership or corporate culture. I think, especially in the last year and a half, we've seen that people coming back to the workforce are demanding a little bit more from where they work, right? And rightfully so. I think people deserve to be happy and feel like there's a meaning to what they do. And so I help people through that process, leaders through that process of figuring out what exactly does it mean to build a culture where there's equality and everyone feels included and everyone feels a sense of belonging, and obviously there's diversity. So
Hmm.
I help curate that process.
Are you from that world in terms of corporates? What was before you started this business, what were you doing?
Well, I started really in business development for tech companies. So I was in Silicon Beach in LA, like jumping from startup to startup, which was so exciting. And that really propelled me to do what I do today because I worked for, I don't know, several startups, maybe it's like 6 to 8 startups. And everywhere I went, leadership looked the same. The board
Hmm.
looked the same.
Hmm.
Everyone sort of sounded the same. The missions were very similar. So it got really homogenous and really boring, in fact, after a while. And so I started looking around and trying to figure out how can I help these people with such great ideas create companies that don't all feel, look, and sound the same, where people
Hmm.
can really feel like they belong there.
Why do they look the same, sound the same? What's going on? Because you would have thought in tech, where in theory it's meritocratic, isn't it? That you should get a job and your seniority should depend on your ideas and your skills as opposed to what you look like. Of
Right.
all industries, it should be a level playing field, but it isn't, is it? What's
It
happened?
isn't. Well, like you said, it's supposed to be a meritocracy, but it turns out that people really like to listen to people who look like them. It turns out that people
Hmm.
like to invest in people who sound like them and reminds them of themselves, right? So you start with a small group that looks a certain way or comes from a certain background, and next thing you know, they're only investing and mentoring and pulling up people who are very much similar to them. So
Hmm.
it becomes
It's
that
not
small
by
circle.
cynical design, though, is it? It's really just by
No.
habit, is it not? People aren't
Yeah.
saying. I mean,
Yeah.
you can understand why somebody would invest in somebody that looked like them, because they're
Absolutely.
taking a risk, and therefore, well, if that person looks and sounds like me, then rightly or wrongly, I believe that they probably are more trustworthy, right?
Exactly. I recognize what they're talking about. I can trust more, where they're going to go based on their backgrounds. Of course, it makes sense, right? But I think a lot of times people do that, like you said, without realizing. And that's why we
Hmm.
work through like implicit biases and figuring out why are we hiring people who we already feel really comfortable with? Why are we not
Hmm.
challenging ourselves by bringing someone into the team that adds to the culture rather than just fit the culture?
Hmm.
So we have to start asking those questions.
Yeah. And where we are right now as well, Naz, the last 18 months has been a rather interesting time. I say interesting, it's a very subjective word, but
Right.
for example, you've ended up in where you are on an island in Brazil, away from the heat of the action on the West Coast.
That's right.
But globally, we've seen a really interesting shift. A lot more of this is getting prominence, hasn't it? A lot more has now, we now have the spotlight on these issues. And it's
Yeah.
becoming very loaded as well, isn't it? in the sense that it's
Yeah,
becoming very much divisive for some people. The media likes to make things divisive. What's happened in the
sure
last
does.
18 months? If you can give us a very brief, compressed version of events, how has life changed, especially with what you care about in the last 18 months?
I've seen a lot of really great improvements. I have to say that before the pandemic and before all the social unrest, interracial unrest, it was the language around what I do was still very coded. We still had to
Mm,
be very sort of like circle around what we really were trying to say. And now I feel like there's a lot more freedom to just come right out and say what we really mean. So that has been a really great thing to see and has been a really quick change in the industry that I'm in to be able to go from let's just talk about diversity to all of a sudden we can say anti-racism and we can
mm,
say what diversity actually means. So that has been really great. The other thing is that things have sped up so much. I think that before that, companies thought that bringing in that sense of equality and sense of belonging was really a nice to have, but now they're noticing that it's a must have because people are not
mm,
going to come back to work if they don't have that sense of belonging, if they don't have that sense of purpose, if they don't feel like they have a career growth path in their company, right? Or if they don't see themselves represented in leadership. So some companies are sort of scrambling to figure out how they can actually put into practice the things that they've been sort of paying lip service to for the past few years.
mm,
So that has been a really great improvement that I've seen. However, like you said, yes, things are divisive, but I think that when we are open to actually stating our views, it's pretty great because then we can start a conversation from there, right? If we're all just sort of like being really quiet about what we think, it's difficult to move forward. So if you
mm,
are able to tell me exactly what you mean, then I can ask questions. I can be curious and go, well, tell me more about that. Where does that come from?
mm,
What do you really feel threatened by, or what do you really feel like this change is going to bring to you? And then that conversation can start, and we can find a mean ground. But I think before, when everybody was really too guarded, it was really
mm.
difficult to move things forward.
Yeah. There needs to be a space where people can talk without fear on all
Yeah,
sides, right? That people can voice their feelings, that people can say how they've been prejudiced by other people and at the receiving ends of people's opinions. And also, I think from leadership as well, is that I feel that one of the reasons why people don't talk about these things so openly or don't give it a platform is they're scared to talk about these things. Not that they don't want to talk about them, but they're scared of saying something wrong,
right.
whether it's about race or it's about gender identity, for example. It seems that whenever we look at the media, everything's so loaded that if you're just an observer, you're thinking, wow, this is interesting, but I'm not sure how to talk about this, right? This is the problem that I have. Even if you take like an
Right.
issue such as pronouns,
Hmm.
the media likes to jump on this and like amplify it, doesn't it? And maybe blow it out of proportion, and say, oh, all these people are saying these things, and it scares people. So how do we
Hmm.
do that? How do we create an open and fearless conversation about that in the workplace?
Well, first, I just want to tell leaders that they're not alone. I've been working with so many companies over the last 18 months, and at every single place I've been, I have heard the same thing. I'm just scared. I don't know if I'm going to say the right thing, right? So you're not alone. Everyone's
Mm,
confused. Nobody knows what to say. So it's okay. And I think that the first step in the process is to be vulnerable and allow yourself to be vulnerable as a leader, to begin from
mm,
that space, right? To begin by saying, I don't really know how to move forward. I don't know how to be the best leader for everybody in this moment, but I'm open to listening. I'm open to learning. I'm open to making mistakes and having, my team tell me that I'm making
mm,
mistakes or acknowledge that I'm making mistakes. I think something that makes people that moves that sense of belonging um, to an open space or it creates that sense of belonging much more quickly is when leaders actually are able to step into the room and say, hey, I've gotten this critical feedback in the past. It was difficult for me to hear. I got
mm,
defensive, but then this is what I chose to do about it. Or when you open up that space for other leaders to bring that same fallibility forward, right? And I think that when our leaders become a little bit more vulnerable and when they allow themselves the space to admit mistakes or to move forward from mistakes or to listen to critical feedback, I think it really trickles down to the rest of the culture. So it creates a culture where people are really more open to fallibility, so that they can then find paths forward, right? It's not just about, hey, let's just go ahead and make mistakes. It's about, okay, great, we made mistakes. It's out in the open. What do we learn from this? How do we move forward? And that helps in everything. It doesn't help just in diversity and belonging. It's going to help with innovation too, right? It's going to help with making a better product. It's going to help with your marketing. It's going to help with your bottom line in general. Because if a salesperson can walk into a room and say, man, that strategy did not work, let's try something else. Or if a product designer can step into the room and say, hey, I really messed that one up. What else could I have done? Then you have that open room for innovation in every area of your business.
Yeah, that vulnerability doesn't come easy though, right? And
No.
that's the challenge, isn't it? Because we've been trained otherwise. And really, leadership today is not about having all the answers, which I think is the reprogramming of leadership, isn't it? Is that actually it's okay to say, I don't know. I don't know how to talk about this, but let's put it out there and let's get some ideas. And we look at leaders in a different way as well. We don't expect them to be experts. Rather, we expect them to be people who give other people a voice. That's their role, isn't it? To green light and to give us the guardrails to operate within and to say, actually, it's okay to talk about this now. Maybe it's not something that I have all the answers, but she does or he does. And let's create this forum for it. And I've got the resources to empower people to talk about these things. And that requires a mindset shift. And maybe it's a generational thing. Maybe it will take time. But hopefully with the work of people like you, we'll get there.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm going to totally butcher a quote, but there is a quote out there that says something about how a great leader, when they walk out of a room, nobody realizes that they were even there. They feel like they did all the work themselves, right? So it's really less about that spotlight leadership and more about figuring out how can you be that leader that uplifts everyone and multiplies everyone's efforts rather than just micromanage or try to take credit for everything. So yeah, there's definitely a learning curve, and that's why I do what I do. I work with lots of people where I meet them first, and there's a big barrier, there's a big wall, and there's a big sense of like, but this is how we've always done things, and it takes a while to break through that. But once we do, and so many possibilities open, it's pretty great.
That's humans. Don't give up on them, Naz. Naz, everybody, the Mind Designer. Where do we find out more about you?
Well, I'm on my website at theminddesigner.com. It's just theminddesigner.com, and everywhere else at The Mind Designer.
Awesome. Naz, thanks for joining us from an island somewhere in Brazil.
Thank you
really
so much.
Appreciated it.
Have a wonderful day, everyone.